Welcome to the Northland Bass'in podcast with fishing guide John Myrie and bass tournament angler Ken Melander. On the Northland Bass'in podcast, we cover everything bass fishing for both largemouth and smallmouth here in the Wisconsin Northland and all across the northern tier of Midwest states. Hello, folks. I'm John Myrie, and sitting here together with me is co-host Ken Melander, and this is episode 11 of the Northland Bass'in podcast. And Ken, it just seems like we're adding to the number of episodes out there.
Yeah, the summer just flew by this year. I didn't get as much time on the water as I'd like to, but
we never do. It seems like that hard water stuff is okay, but I don't really particularly. I'd rather be in a boat.
No, it's much safer in a boat as long as the lake ain't too busy.
I always kid people. I say, it's just too darn hard cutting a hole big enough to get my boat in, much less one big enough to troll.
Well, nowadays with forward-facing sonar, I see a lot of guys punching 3 holes, one for their Vexlar, one for their forward-facing sonar, and one for their jig.
Yeah. And in the bass fishing, as we're recording this, it seems like almost August weather because everything seems to be running way behind. I mean, water temperatures are way behind. They're higher than normal for this time of year. I think we're going to have an extended fall here for what it looks like, but Mother Nature can pull a real quick switch on you, too.
Well, yesterday on the news, there was like 3 areas of the Northwest that had record highs.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. There's some predictions it's going to be a very harsh winter this year. I hope it isn't. I like snow, but not that much.
Well, I like to have 2 feet of ice on the lake so I can get out more often, feeling safe. There'd been a couple years in the past that it was nearly impossible to get out there. Too much snow, you get stuck, or hard to walk anywhere because the weight of the snow sunk it into the water column, so there was a lot of water over the ice. So it was terrible ice fishing conditions.
Well, yeah, and that usually happens when you get prolonged warm, and then it snows a lot before you build up a bunch of ice. It creates good insulation. Anyway, we're going to talk about late fall bass fishing here. And, the fishing is going to be good, way up to almost till ice up, really. I mean, a lot of guys don't get out there, but I don't care whether you're after smallmouth or largemouth, or particularly smallmouth, or if you're after other fish like walleyes or muskies or anything else. Some of the best fishing, you can get right up till almost ice up. I mean, my personal biggest muskie, I watched ice crystal forming around the boat. I mean, yeah, it locked up the lake the next day. So, it's going to be pretty good out there really late.
Yeah, hunting season takes a lot of anglers off the water when the fishing actually gets really good. It seems like all the bait starts making contact with shallower structure, whether it be a weed flat or they're attracted to a lot of the weeds that are still green in the fall. And the bait fish can be on the edge or they can be on top, so it creates a lot of variety of presentations. And the smallmouth especially start packing in schools. And some lakes they pack by year class, and some it's just like everything. You'll have the largemouth and smallmouth mixed.
Well, when you're talking, late fall, is that mostly going to be a deeper pattern? That's where I've caught the fish, especially on live bait, catching them in, anywhere from 20 to 30 feet of water on rock bars and points and, deeper structure. But you find them up in, the green weeds, because there's always going to be some green weeds, even going into the winter.
Before turnover, when the water temperatures flip within a water column, they'll be on the weeds pretty hard. Some days the smallies will be on a topwater on top of the weeds, and then sometimes they'll even take a rattle trap on top of the flats, even sand flats in 5-6 feet of water, or on rock ridges. I've had good success as soon as the leaves start hitting the water. Spinnerbait pattern can become really good, and you can do it over the weeds in 15 feet of water, or you can do it in 3-4 feet of water on rock ridges. It all depends upon where the bait is. The bait are gravitating towards a little bit warmer water, so they do a lot of suspending in the water column, depending upon the oxygen of the weeds. And so you have to use a variety of techniques in the fall, but once you get them rolling, it's usually good for 2-3 hours, and then you might see the minnows just go to the edge, and then you fish the edge of the weed line. But it can be really fun. It's easier to figure out than it is in, say, mid-August, because in mid-August they can go out and suspend in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
All of them suspended fish now are making contact. So on the lakes that you have ciscos and a lot of shiners, as soon as you see the ciscos making contact to hard bottom, that's the transition where they're going from main lake basin to structure. And so I just fished a tournament down on the Mississippi River, and towards the evening, the shad, they made a migration to shallow hard bottom.
Yeah.
You know, during the day, they were out suspended in 30 feet of water, and then they made a transition to the shallows.
Well, you know, when you mentioned the turnover, and one thing that I've always kind of felt and wondered if that was correct on that, but, you know, I don't care whether it's bass or muskies or any of the predator fish. You know, we're setting up pre-turnover. A lot of those fish are up shallow. They go shallow. And right during the turnover, I'm talking when the lake gets murky and it starts puking up chunks of weeds and stuff, and right when that thermocline dissipates, I've had really good luck up in, 3, 4, 5 feet of water in the greenest weeds I could find, usually like an inside corner, inside turn. And I've always felt that it was maybe related to the oxygen levels, because, if you take some of the big, deep, clear lakes, you down below the thermocline is lower oxygen, and when that dissipates, it's going to mix with the other parts of the lake, which would, in effect, have to drop the dissolved oxygen levels somewhat. But then where would you find the best oxygen? And that would be up in the green weeds, especially if the sun is shining.
Yeah, in the shallows. As an example, people that drive the roads real early in the morning, especially after rain, you'll see the frog migration. And even certain parts of the area up here will have a lizard migration. A lot of people don't realize that we have lizards in the area, and they migrate, and they'll hibernate around water. Sometimes they'll go in the muck area, but salamanders.
Yeah.
We have quite a few salamanders around. They seem to get on ground and go crazy like in May, but then they go back to the water. So you see the frog migration and other amphibians, crossing the road and stuff, going to water. That's when the frog bite for largemouth really gets going good.
Well, we're talking pre-turnover and coming up to turnover. What's your game plan as far as when you go out there, you're looking for smallies on one of the clear lakes, for instance?
Well, usually I'll go to the biggest shallow bay in a water system and see if the turnover's happened there yet. If it hasn't happened there, I will concentrate on the edges of the weeds or on secondary points off from that bay that still has good weeds, because there'll be a lot of bait fish gravitating towards that area, and then once the fall turnover happens in there, they'll pull out, and then they'll pull back in once it stabilizes, and it's really complex. Every lake's a little bit different. I do know that, you get into some areas, the air above the weeds just smells really, really bad, and I don't know if it's releasing methane gas or what, but it smells pretty bad, and I just try to avoid those areas. So you can eliminate a lot of section of the lake during turnover that's right in the middle of it, and then concentrates on, maybe go to the east side of the lake or the north side of the lake where it ain't quite as bad.
Well, you made a good point there, because most lakes will have different basins in them or different sections, and that turnover doesn't happen universally across the whole lake. You can have turnover happening in different sections of the lake, as far as they're in a different stage as far as the fall turnover and that changing of the season, basically.
Yeah, I just don't have a lot of experience to understand what the pH is doing, whether the lake water is really acidic or too much alkaline, and we have a lot of sandy areas in our areas that can lead to acidic soils. So, but then you have decomposing matter that the wind mixes up the water, and a lot of dead weeds end up going down at the bottom of the lake too. So then that lifts some of the other decaying matter up off the bottom, and as it flips. So the deeper the water, the less effect it would have on the turnover. If you get it out in that 25, 30 feet of water, if it's a hard bottom, turnover isn't affected there. And so there can be lines in the water. Every lake might be different. It depends upon the depth and the bottom substrate. Where you'll have all the turnover happening, and it'll create a line where all the fish will congregate. And sometimes, them smallmouth will be deep, and the guys, that really slam them on sucker minnows can be on the edges of those transitions of turnover.
You mentioned on sucker minnows, and I actually go to northern pike-sized suckers, smaller northern pike-sized suckers in the fall, because good grief, right now, as we're recording this, we've been catching, 20-inch smallmouth on full-size muskie topwater bases. They'll eat that. They'll eat a northern pike sucker.
Yeah, there was a gentleman that came in he came in and showed me a picture when I was working one day, and he said he caught a 7.3 out of the Chippewa River that ate a 10-inch glide bait for muskies.
Yeah, you bet. Well, as we get going here in the podcast, we'll be talking more about fall presentations and stuff. We've got an interview coming up with fishing guide Chris Beeksma, he's been guiding a long time up on that Chequamegon Bay out of Ashland, and he'll be talking about bass fishing up there, which is it's close to Hayward here. We've got some world-class lakes around Hayward here, but, it's only an hour drive north of here to get on the Chequamegon Bay, too, and, that's some great fishing up there. We'll be talking to him about that stuff, too.
Yeah, Chris has a lot of knowledge there, and, of course, he fishes all species, depending upon his, client preference, but For smallmouth up there, my best days, I had John Priggett with me, and we stopped counting at 50 doubles, and then we had to leave because we ran out of tubes. But average was probably 3 1/4. We never caught very many over 5, but we caught a lot. One thing I do know that there's a lot of clay in the substrate there, and the wind can really dirty it up, so that moves fish around too. And then there's big, they talk about the sand cut with some timber on it. That can be good in the spring. There's some reed areas that the smallmouth will spawn. Crappies are good fishing in those same areas. But there's a lot of structure. If you actually look at a map, it's got everything.
Yeah, it does.
The weed beds, and I was talking to a gentleman who was out there. He was out throwing Zara spooks for the smallies, and he caught trout, brown, lake trout, and smallmouth in the same cabbage patch. So, like Chris says, you never know what you're going to catch when you're going out there fishing. But that was on a good cabbage bed off from a hump.
Well, it's an interesting talk I had with Chris. We need to talk about a couple of our sponsors here. Big sponsors on the podcast here is the Hayward Lakes Visitor and Convention Bureau and the Hayward Lakes Chamber of Commerce. And, we're sitting here recording out in my office out here in the National Forest, kind of in the middle of nowhere. But in the Hayward area here, we got basically hundreds of lakes, hundreds and hundreds of lakes. We got rivers. We've got so much water up here to fish. And if you're looking at bass fishing, we've got tremendous smallmouth bass fisheries, whether it's in the rivers. Some of the waters are not high numbers waters. I mean, like I'm out here on Moose Lake, and it's not a high numbers lake with smallmouth, but percentage-wise of those fish that are 18 to over 20 is a little bit higher than a lot of lakes. And then you get on Cootery and Grindstone, and those lakes, they're tremendous. They're managed as a smallmouth bass fishery. One fish over 18 inches is the regulations on them. So we've got all of that going on when it comes to fishing up here. And it's not just smallmouth bass or largemouth bass. There's good pan fishing here. There's good walleye fishing, muskie fishing, northern pike. We could go on and on on that.
Yeah, in every lake, it seems like the color of the smallmouth are different. Like Moose Lake, they're like footballs. You get a 4-pounder, it's really tough just to hold on to them because they're so wide, but they're really, really dark. They're actually real pretty. And then you get, like Grindstone, they're light and they have a lot of definition on their different colors. They're like a true smallmouth photo. But so it's different. Like if you get on the river, they're a little different color. It seems like they're all kind of blending with their environment a little bit. Depends upon watercolor.
Yeah, they do. And you mentioned them fish are heavier out here on moose. I mean, I have guys all the time that get them on a muskie bait, and even I don't know for sure if they hooked a muskie to start with or what, because these fish will pretty much double over an 8-foot muskie rod, and they don't come to the surface. I mean, they're just brute power. But, and the fish are different in any lake. Smallmouth always fight hard, but it seems like some of the more riverine or flowage fish seem to be stronger even.
Or even darker water, they fight. Like the Phillips chain, the little 2-pound smallie there will just fight you like crazy.
And the other stuff in the Hayward area, if you're looking at coming up and looking for a place to go, we've got a lot of remote areas, a lot of little lakes you can kind of pack into with a canoe or something. You've got, miles and miles and miles of trails for ATVs, UTVs, for hiking, snowmobiling. It's just, so much to do and see up here. I mean, you go to town, you can spend all day in town if the fishing is really slow, and you can see a lot of different things. The Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame, and just uptown in Main Street, there's a bunch of stuff.
Not to mention that grouse hunting. Even the drive out here, I go, that looks grousey. That looks grousey. I got to come out here and check it out. Grouse is my favorite wild game to eat, and I really enjoy grouse hunting.
The only bird I know of that could find 3 trees to get between you and the end of your, and them real quick when they fly up. Seems like they do it on purpose.
Yeah, with a good day's grouse hunting, the guy should be out there catching bass too.
Yeah, I know. It's just, the old saying, so much to do in the fall, but so little time.
Correct.
Well, anybody's looking for more information on the Hayward area here, they can go to the Hayward Lakes VCB website, and that's at haywardlakes.com. Or they can go to the Chamber of Commerce, and that's haywardareachamber.com. And a lot of good information. Or you can go to our website, my website, wnoradio.com, and you can find links to all that stuff on the radio show and the podcast we do. So a lot of good stuff there. Anyway, I promise you guys that we're going to talk to Chris Beeksma, and we're going to go ahead right now. I had that great talk with him on the phone the other day, and let's talk about smallmouth bass up on the Chequamegon Bay.
Yeah, you guys talked about a really important fact is in regards to collecting fish, and fishing kind of slow, especially for smallmouth. They're real curious, and some lakes they've seen a lot of baits, so if they're not chasing, they're going to really inspect your bait. So scent is very important. And then when the fish are suspended, a lot of times they won't go all the way down to the bottom to get to your bait. I've learned a lot about smallmouth with forward-facing sonar. I use Garmin.
Oh yeah.
And so I did some experimenting when they were suspended on a weed line like 5 feet. I actually drop shot 6 feet.
Oh yeah.
People think I'm crazy.
Well, I
just hammered them that day. Drop shot in 6 feet.
6 feet of water.
Yeah, because they never chased down for it. They were right in that transition, whether or not they're going to chase the minnows up to the edge of the weeds or just sit there, but they were in a negative. It was probably barometer was 31.45. So you just had to keep it in their face, and then pretty soon you'd see, really hard to see them against the weeds, but you see some little activity, and all of a sudden, boom, gone.
Well, and that multiple fish looking at your bait is not just unique to bass or smallmouth. It's with almost everything, even crappies. You really learn this real quick with forward-facing sonar. You can see, if you got one fish, you maybe swim up and look at it. But if you got 3 or 4 of them come swimming up, one of them's going to get greedy and grab it. It seems like. Yeah.
So that, back in the day before. I used to run flashers all the way up, and just like not too many years ago. So like fishing the rivers on the wing dams, I'd always get snagged up. So I'd throw a bobber on a god dang Zoom plastic.
Oh yeah.
And just let it flutter over the wing dam. So I learned something a lot then, because I did actually really good. Now you can just live scope, and nope, they're not here. You're out of there. But a lot of guys don't do that during tournaments and stuff, but I pre-fish a lot, bobber fishing with god dang minnow bait, the same type head and everything, whether it be a smeltomator or one with the blade on a bobber, and just be really aggressive and cover a lot of water, especially when the smallies are suspended. And then one of the other baits I use to get some bigger ones, I'll use the twin tail grub just on a regular jig, and I'll cut half my weed guards off so it's a lot thinner, and I'll cut it right at the barb of the hook, because the smallie, they hold on to your bait so hard. If you have a little too much weed guard in it, they'll flip the bait on its side when they take it. So there's certain diameter plastics you want to use in a weaker weed guard and a style of head so that when you set the hook, you have pretty much 100% hookup ratio. You know, if you use bigger than a 5/0 hook or a 4/0 hook, 3/0 is better. And there's companies now that make micro football jigs that work really good out on the rocks too.
That's good information there. And I'm going to go right to that talk ahead with Chris right now. And we come back, we've got some great tips for that late part, post turnover or after turnover, as far as finding some of them smallmouths and catching them. And we'll talk about that. But right now, let's hear what we had with a conversation with Chris. Chris, good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
You know, you're up there and spent a lot of years up on the Chequamegon Bay up there and around on Lake Superior, and that's a fishery that's close to the Hayward area here, just a short drive up there. Interesting body of water with pretty diverse fishery.
Yeah, it's a kind of a different ballgame on the big lake. You never know what you're going to catch when you're out fishing if you're actually targeting a species, but a lot of variety and 30,000 acres of water to cover.
30,000. I kind of guessed it was bigger than that, but it's a pretty big chunk of water. And first thing we should mention to people is that water can get kind of unruly sometimes too. You got to be careful with the weather patterns.
Yeah, you always have to. I use the NOAA weather app, and for the wind is the main thing. Things can change real quickly.
Yeah, any particular wind that is the worst wind to be looking at?
Really, northwest is the wind that you want to try to avoid. Once in a great while, you'll have a calm northwest wind. Usually, northwest means you're not going fishing.
Yeah, that's about right. When you're talking about the fishery up there, I mean, it's pretty well known as a world-class smallmouth bass fishery, and that all came about when Roger LePenner went to work and trying to get a size limits to protect those fisheries, didn't they?
Yeah, they were really taking a lot of big smallmouths out of the bay back in the day there, and it must have been the 80s. I can't even remember what year they started that 22-inch size limit, and it really turned things around, and it was able to for that fishery to establish itself again, and it turned into the fishery that it is now.
Yeah, well, the size limit up there, what is it, minimum 22, and you're allowed one fish, or what is it?
One fish over 22 inches, and they're not plentiful.
Well, when you get to that end at 20, anything over 22 inches is getting to be a pretty rare bird when it comes to smallmouth. I mean, I don't know how many of them get that big.
Exactly. It's an old fish most of the time also. So I've caught a lot of 21 and a halves and 21 and 3/4, but you're talking a 20-year-old fish.
Yeah, well, and the advantage you have up there is just the sheer numbers of those bigger fish. You look at some of the lakes, even around Hayward here, and 20-inch fish, 21s, even some 22s even, and I've actually seen bigger out of these lakes. But the numbers are not there compared to the Chequamegon Bay. Chequamegon Bay has a really high number of smallmouth in it, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rare to catch 20 inches at all. I guided last Saturday, and we had, 7 over 20 inches, but none over 21. So your chance of catching a bunch of 4-pounders, 4.5-pounders even is really good.
Well, in the areas up there, I mean, historically, the area up there north of Sandcut and over toward the Chequamegon and over that way, that basically was the area that seemed to have the most bass. But now I'm getting reports that the whole Ashland waterfront, lots of different places have got a pretty good population of smallmouth.
Yeah, I think what happened through the years is that, we've had such a drastic change in average water temperatures. I mean, when I used to guide with Roger, we never left the sloughs, Chequamegon and Sandcut. We'd fish it all summer long, and there's fish that go in and out of there. But now you can catch fish in, like, say, in the Ashland waterfront, Washburn waterfront, the weed beds over on the far west side, I mean, they're really spread out in those 30,000 acres.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of actually cover in structure in there too. You've got channels been dredged in there. You've got a lot of timber, dock pilings, just a lot of different things to attract the fish.
Yeah, you do, and there's a lot of weed beds, especially in the Ashland side and toward Washburn. And people forget that bass like weed beds, and so do smallmouth compared to largemouth.
What kind of tips can you give people that maybe want to make a trip up there, besides going to watch the weather and pick your days that you go up, but where start looking, what kind of baits, how do you gear up, what there?
Well, yesterday we went right out in front of the second landing. There's a vast weed bed out there, and we just threw spinner baits and caught fish, so something that you're able to get through the weeds. Otherwise, I try to find weeds and fish the weed edges. Last week, we caught a lot of fish on Ned rigs, and I like the quarter ounce because I like to, fish, 15 to 25 feet, and you want them to get down there quick. And of course, the drop shot has been really good. I was with a guy 2 weeks ago when the water is still really warm. We were up in 5 feet of water, and he's whacking them on jerk baits. So, the same variety of baits that guys fish in the spring. And tubes are good. And, top water when it presents itself when it's calm. Those are all baits that work.
Well, the just old-fashioned tubes. I mean, we fished together years ago, fishing tubes, caught them, and tubes still work today. I mean, you've got a whole lot of different ways now. You mentioned the Ned rig, and we've got, drop shot rigs and stuff, but the tube still plays a part in there as far as catching smallmouth.
Yeah, and what's nice about a tube is you can, it's a bait you can easily rig weedless too. So, it looks like a crayfish. It still catches fish, there's no doubt about it. That's the number one food probably in the bay for the smallies.
Yeah, somebody that's not maybe quite aware of the rig and the tube weedless, I guess I think they call it a stupid tube rigging, where you bury the hook, basically Texas rigging, the tube.
Yeah, you can just put an 1/8 ounce weight in front of it, a cone weight or whatever you want. The other thing people are doing is like the free rig, where you put a weight that has just a hole in the top of that, so that just runs up and down the line, and throw a tube behind that, and that works great.
And I know you mentioned Ned rigs. I see that Ned rig. People think about it for bass, but it catches everything, actually. I mean, but there's a way to work it, and there's a way not to work it too.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the Ned rig, is you can give it to somebody who's, doesn't fish a lot, and they catch fish with it. I kind of basically work a Ned rig and a drop shot the same way. Just I like them to sit still, wiggle them, and then move them. Let them sit still, wiggle them, and then move them, instead of working it like a walleye jig.
I know the people that have the most trouble working a Ned rig or a drop shot seem to be the musky guys. I mean, we can't sit still long enough. So sometimes we got to force ourselves to slow down that much.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I've been telling this to all my clients in the last year, is that I've finally realized smallmouth bass fishing is really boring. It's a boring way to fish, really, to catch these fish, unless, you got a fast pattern going with top waters or spinner baits, but otherwise you just gotta be patient.
Well, and you're talking there, the one thing about being patient is they're notorious for, you got to leave long pauses on your bait, whether you're fishing a jerk bait or a topwater bait or plastics. It seems like they want it sitting still so they can look at it for a while before they decide to eat it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also think they follow baits a lot. So, you got to, work it all the way to the boat and be ready for a hit right at the boat. And you've seen it when you hook one and you bring them in, there's 4 or 5 of them following it. So, that they're all looking at it.
Well, that's kind of a trick there too, is that if you can get one fish looking at it, yeah, maybe you could catch him, but you get 2, your odds go up. You get 3 or 4 looking at your bait, and somebody's going to grab it.
Yeah, I think, it's you hear about this all the time. They talk about getting the school fired up, and that's a big key if you can do that.
And the smallmouth up there, I mean, the bay, the regulations have produced a great fishery as far as trophy smallmouth. I mean, it's getting to be known as one of the places, go-to places. That and over in Green Bay and Sturgeon Bay area, they're producing some big fish. And I don't know why it is that the Great Lakes is just such a tremendous fishery for smallmouth, but some of those areas on the Great Lakes are.
Yeah, and we know for a fact that the Lake Michigan has the gobies and Lake Erie and those have that high protein food for them, and that's why they're getting the 7 and 8 pounders and we're not. I think we have fish, close to that big, but ours are still eating crayfish and minnows.
Well, the minnows, they still got the emerald shiners up there. I'm sure they eat a lot of them.
Yep. The emerald shiners, spot tail shiners. There's a variety of different minnow type. Of course, smelt are in there. They're in the bay. A lot of the spring, summer, and fall, and herring. There's all kinds of food for them.
And just about everything will eat smelt. Well, Chris, a lot of great information there. Anybody's looking for information on your guiding, how do they get a hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is at getbit@checknet.net. That's CHEQNET.net or 715-292-4410.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you greatly for taking the time with our audience here, and hopefully you'll have a good season out there.
Thanks a lot, John. Hopefully we can fish together one of these days again.
Yeah, we need to do that. We're both getting older.
Let's do it.
Okay, Guy. Thank you.
Take care.
Well, Ken, it was interesting talking to Chris. I fished with him years ago. Actually, me and one of the other guys from Hayward here got a chance to get out with him, and we caught a pile of smallmouth that time when we went out. But back then, we were concentrating mostly on, Sandcut and Chequamegon. That was before they kind of dispersed and moved out to the whole bay out there.
Yeah, he mentioned, the wind coming out of the northwest can be pretty tough, but boy, looking on the map, it looks like a lot of rock points and stuff on the west side that you might be able to get by to some degree, but most of the weed beds are a ways off from shore, because it has a deep channel on the west side. That can probably make it pretty rough, because that is a pretty big area, especially if the waves are coming through the gap. Well, there's an incredible amount of structure right off the Ashland shoreline, too. You got all them old dock pilings in there and them channels coming in, and, and they're fish in there. And if you, and then you get, I never tried down in that far southeast corner where you got that Fish Creek comes in, but that whole back bay in there is all shallow with weeds and stuff, too, and I've heard guys are getting them in there, too. Yeah, I think the wind muddies that whole section, the whole southeast part of the section up when it gets windy. Well, if it's the wind or if it's the stuff coming down the creek. It's with rains and stuff, it seems like. But yeah, I think both can contribute. Anyway, we're talking about I said we were going to talk about the late fall post turnover thing. They did real common. I get them out there in 20 to 30, 35 feet, sometimes in the fall out there. And I fish a lot of, if I'm guiding especially, we're fishing a lot of really big, when I'm talking big, I'm talking 5 and 6 inch minnows, sucker minnows for a smallmouth. And the one thing that I will tell people is if you're going to fish those bigger sucker minnows, do not fish them on a single hook. Any live bait you're going to fish for smallmouth, fish it on a jig, because if you fish in a single hook, it seems like a really high percentage of them got that hook way down their gullet. Whereas with the jig, they just don't seem to have that. They seem to be hooked in the mouth. I don't know if it's the weight of the jig. When they suck it in and they flare their gills and they suck that bait in, I don't know if it's the jig tends to postpone, the rest of the bait moves in and the jig hangs out farther, or what the deal is, but it seems like with a single hook, you hook them a lot deeper. Yeah, that is true, and I don't know, it's because they're trying to flip the minnow around in their mouth, they're like re-gripping and re-sucking it back in, and the jig just kind of prevents that the water flow to pull that jig in there backwards. So, yeah, you're right. It'd be like going fishing the spawning smallmouth on a drop shot leech. I'll bet 50% of the fish are bleeding after that.
Yeah, I just don't often fish, especially live bait. I mean, I don't fish with a single hook on it right away. I think with a drop shot, you're probably a little bit better because you've got that line tight at the top and the bottom, and that'll hinder that thing getting back too far into their mouth, simply. But if you're fishing, like if you're out there with any kind of a free line where you're using a drop shot with the tag end on it with the hook floating loose on the end, or if you're fishing a bobber rig or something, that's where I think those fish really get hooked down deep, because that hook just goes right with it. And they try to take stuff head first if they can, but if you got some weight on it, which is the jig head, I think that it doesn't get in there as quick. But whatever the case on that, I usually don't use just a single hook, because most of we're practicing catch and release. We want those fish to come back another day again. So if you're catching and releasing fish of any species, the object is for the fish to survive, to be there again, not just to pull it out of the water and get a bunch of pictures for YouTube or whatever, and the fish maybe don't survive. So you got to be careful there. Talking about fishing that post turnover, Ken, what are some of the areas you look for? Because I'll get in and talk about what I do, but what do you do? And you fish more bass than I do. I've got to fish everything.
Depends upon water temp, really, but if it's pre-turnover, I'll put on a top water and just go right at daybreak and try to locate them. And
post turnover,
the whopper popper works good.
Oh, I know it does.
You can cover a lot of water, and they rip on that, and you can burn it pretty fast. Once you locate them, you can go with just a popping bait.
Yeah.
And then it seems like as the sun gets up, they'll settle down on the certain structure, and then midday or in the afternoon when the sun gets on the weeds or something, they'll pull up into the weeds again, and then spinner baits can really
but about after the turnover, when we're getting into that, getting close, the water temperature gets down into that below 50 degrees and stuff.
Use electronics and find the bait, and find difference between rock, sand. Smallies like rock ridges, and the rock ridges don't have to be very big, or they doesn't have to be one big one from shore. They can just be a little, as long as there's something vertical that they can sit next to. Oh. And that can be deep weeds too. Coontail stays pretty green even after the turnover. So coontail is a non-rooted plant that grows in soft substrate, usually on an inside turn next to a main lake point. Yeah. Sometimes it'll grow, in the flats and pad bays, but not as good. Largemouth will use that, but smallies will suspend right on them coontail clumps too.
Well, when I'm out there on some of the big lakes here that have that one fish over 18-inch size, a lot of times I'm looking for deeper rock structure, like you mentioned, deeper rock bars, looking for like a point. If a point comes out and it's got a cluster of rocks or gravel on the tip of it and it drops off, we're finding a lot of fish on that too. But it's just... I'm fishing a lot of times when I'm guiding. We'll try different stuff, but a lot of times it's the live bait and the larger live bait. But what would be some of your go-to options for artificial lures when the conditions like that? You're talking sub 50 degree water temperatures and fish are out there in 25, 30 feet of water.
I'm not much of a drop shot and Ned rig. At that time of year, I like going with bigger baits. So I'll use a 5-inch swim bait if I think they're suspended. Or I'll use a football jig.
Yeah.
If they're dragging, eating crawdads, I'll drag the bottom. And usually, using any type of jig head, you're going to collect the fish. So that's so true. You got to fish a little bit slow, but smallmouth are real curious. And even a Carolina rig, that sinker and bead just busting around in the rocks, and that smallies will swim from 20, 30, sometimes 40 yards away to investigate. Yeah. So if you can get multiple fish to investigate, let's say if you're fishing and you don't know where the school is, but all of a sudden you get bit, you can turn the school on and then you can just cast into multiple places and catch them.
Yeah, lots of stuff there. I mean, and we're kind of concentrated on the smallmouth, but you do any good on largemouth late in the season like that? I really don't go after them, but I know they got to eat too.
Yeah, they tend to like steeper breaks where you can have dying weeds on the top and then greener weeds, going down to the bottom, and that can be a line jump and jig bite then too.
Just like a regular bass jig type.
Yeah.
A lot of good stuff there. Ken, yeah, I know. We're going to be talking about just bass over the next ones. We're going to be getting into the really late fall or the winter, and there's some options there. The interesting thing is that our bass fishing season doesn't close here in Wisconsin anymore. It's open year round, catch and release, and there's some fishing opportunities. I mean, a lot of our lakes will lock up with ice, but there'll be some of the river systems. You can get over on the Mississippi River, St. Croix River. I've never went over and tried in the wintertime fishing them. I've actually went after walleyes out there in the winter, but I'm sure you could go over and catch some smallmouth. That's something else we could talk about, too, in one of the upcoming podcasts.
Yeah, they like sand breaks on the outside bends where there's deeper water that collects a lot of baits, and there'll be a sand edge, and there'll be a current eddy where the current comes above the sand break and it makes a little circle right underneath the sand, and they can be just so the sand is 2 feet deep and the outside bend cut back bank is at 12 feet. The smallies will be in like 3-4 feet.
Yeah, and I didn't mention too that places like the Great Lakes. There's places on the Great Lakes that don't freeze up till really late, or sometimes they don't freeze. But there'd be some options there too.
Well, there's a lot of anglers that catch them at first ice up. First ice they'll be on the flats. Everything will be up on the flats, especially when there's sun penetrating the ice.
Yeah.
Oxygen level from the shallow weeds, kind of like if you can find the areas, it's like everything's in there. Big northerns, too. They can be in 2 feet of water in first ice, big northerns.
A lot of good information in the podcast here, Ken. I know we're going to start to wrap up the podcast here. Again, a couple of sponsors that sponsor and make this thing possible is the Hayward Lakes Visitor and Convention Bureau. Their website is haywardlakes.com. And the Hayward Area Chamber of Commerce, where their website is haywardareachamber.com. And they've been very helpful in trying to help us get this podcast off the ground and promoting it. And the Hayward area is just such a tremendous area to visit.
Yeah, there's I put on Amped Outdoors batteries, lithiums, that... I did a lot of research, and I wanted to find one, if it's like 28 degrees, I still want to charge up. So they have a self-heating system so you don't destroy any cells in the battery. So I spent one full day down at Pool 10 fishing wing dams in heavy current, and I just have a 60 amp, 36 volt.
Yeah.
With a Garmin trolling motor, I had a lot of power left, and I fished from dark to dark. On heavy current fishing wing dams. I fished like 72 wing dams that day.
Yeah, both of my boats are got Amped Outdoors lithium batteries in them, and I'm out there guiding for 5-6 hours working on crappies and walleyes and stuff, spot locked with that Minnesota trolling motor, the Minnesota trolling motor spot locked in 20-25 mile an hour winds. And I come in and I've never seen my batteries less than where I've used 30-40% of the battery. It usually got over 60% left.
I'm talking to other anglers, and they're running twin 100 amp hours of other manufacturers, and I go, geez, why you spend all that extra money when you can get by with Amped Outdoors? I couldn't imagine. I could probably go fishing for a full week if I did that with Amped Outdoors and never even touch a charger.
That's well, my neighbor at the resort here, he went down to Florida Keys. He had one 24 volt 50 amp hour battery, and that's what he run his boat on his Lund. He runs a Lund Alaskan, and he said he fished hard for a month. He was in a condo down there, and he said he only charged it maybe 3 times in fishing hard in the ocean and saltwater. So how strong are those batteries?
And one thing I did notice, if you run a separate battery for your electronics, your resolution stays pretty sharp all the way to the end of fishing. So it seems like some electronics, when you get 11.2 just under 12.
Yeah.
The resolution tends to dissipate. It's not as crisp.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So I run a separate lithium 60 amp 12 volt for my 2 Garmin's and live scope, and it's like great, even on a 14-hour day.
well, more voltage doesn't hurt. The units, a lot of those units will run up to 16, 18 volts, but that's not helping your image pump. People think it does, but it don't. But when you start dropping below the 12 volts, progressively, that's where you'll start to suffer because the equipment doesn't run as good.
Yeah, like hummingbirds, they'll shut off at 11.
Yeah.
They just can't even operate.
Well, anyway, Ken, it's been interesting talking here on a podcast. We get to kind of figure out what we're going to talk about the next few podcasts as we look at winter here. And, maybe we'll talk about some ice fishing stuff. I know the smallmouth bite through the ice, too, a little bit sometimes. But anyway, we're about out of time here. And I want to thank our sponsors and all the people that back us up here. And if you want more information on the podcast, go to my main website, covers the radio show and everything else, is wnoradio.com. And that'll give you all the information you need for the podcast, the radio show, the Hayward area, links back to everything.
Yeah, I think this winter we should talk about baits to have on hand, techniques and equipment. That way the listeners can take advantage of the winter sales that go on around the holidays.
A good one would be rod selection, too, because, one rod, you can use one rod for everything, but it don't do the best of everything for different things, and that's why different rods are designed for different purposes.
And then I'm a really proponent on going with 100% fluorocarbon on some baits. I'll use regular floating mono on other baits, and then there's a time for braid. And different rods.
And a lot of differences in line performance, line visibility, and line sink and floating, whatever. Anyway, we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank people for listening to the podcast. And if you have any questions, if you go to the main podcast website, and that's northlandbass'in.podbean.com. That's our podcast host. If you go there, you can actually leave comments or ask questions, and we'd be happy to try to answer a lot of questions for you and help you out.
I would actually enjoy that, having specific questions. And, if we don't know the answer, we'll research it for you.
You bet. Well, thanks a lot, Ken, and thanks, folks, for listening. And that's a wrap for this edition of the Northland Bass'in podcast.
Well, all right. Thanks, John.
Well, folks, that about wraps up this edition of the Northland Bass'in podcast. If you'd like more information on the Hayward, Wisconsin area, check out the Wisconsin Northland Outdoors Radio Show on our other podcast channel, wnoradio.podbean.com. Or for even more information, on the web at haywardlakes.com or haywardareachamber.com. Thanks for listening, and watch for our next Northland Bass'in podcast. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe to the channel.